Welcome to the Daily Agenda for today's second instalment. Well, who else could it be? Other than Dick Inman, Richard Inman. This morning I watched an utterly hilarious video about him, produced by the Daily Bollocks. Well, yes, well that's very interesting, isn't it? Because this man sure does talk some bollocks. Although, in truth, what came out in that video wasn't that far off the truth in some ways, but not in relation to Richard Inman. It was just completely irrelevant, with a channel that draws in about a mean average of 1,000 views per video, whilst having 48,000 subscribers. We therefore, as I said yesterday, have to conclude that the vast majority of said subscribers are just Ziobots. Ziobots. Because he's a rabid Zionist, isn't he? Fits perfectly, I think. So Richard, in his infinite wisdom, or more to the point, his clinical paranoia, suspicions and fears all bubbling up to the surface, believes that there is an international conspiracy against him by the intelligence services and Islamists working together with deep pockets, and that I'm working for them. Absolutely, you know. Now, if I had my hands in those deep pockets, I can tell you this: all I found is Arabian sand. There's no money, no gold, no gold sovereigns, no gold sovereigns of the nature that Dean Neal discussed with Major Stephen Burns of Archangel PMC. That is. And that's the point that I'm making here, is that Dick Inman's not that far off the truth in some ways, and neither is the Daily Bollocks, even though it may well be mirth and mockery. It's very entertaining, but it's actually very close to the truth, because the essence of the matter is gold sovereigns were discussed. I know, because I brokered that subject, and I actually raised that subject with Major Burns. About payment for the Peter Lynch tapes, and at first it was suggested gold sovereigns, which are capital gains free, and then obviously Mr. Neal said he wanted to declare all of it so everything was above board. Then the suggestion switched to paying him through NGOs, and the clients, of course, were not to be disclosed to Mr. Neal at any stage. But Mr. Neal himself, as I said in a previous video, also admitted that, one of the, I guess you could say, groups of people interested in buying the tapes was the Muslim Brotherhood, which I advised him against immediately because of the disastrous consequences that would entail. Now, if you actually look at the Daily Bollocks video, there's quite a reflection, in truth, an imitation of all of that. The only issue is it didn't apply to Richard Inman, because he's just an irrelevant, sad little sideshow. In truth, he's like, let's say you've eaten the starters, the main course, and the pudding, and there's a few crumbs left on the table. Well, that's Richard Inman. So when you've eaten all of that, all of those wonderful, lovely meals, why on earth would you want to scrape crumbs up off the table and scoff them? Does that make any sense? It doesn't it? Whereas Richard Inman, of course, presumes himself to be far more significant than he really is. That's right, I'm fighting off a midge invasion, I've been invaded by midges as well, no less. That's right, and Stop the Midges campaign. If any Islamists will be funding that one with deep pockets. There you go. So, yes, it's not that far off the truth, but as I said, it didn't apply to Richard Inman. Now, the thing that was discussed with Major Burns, and Dean and myself just couldn't understand why they regarded Paul Thorp as being so significant. You see, the plan was, their plan, that is, not ours. The only plan we had was to broker a deal with Major Burns on behalf of his client to buy those tapes and put them in the public domain. At no time did we ever know the name or identity of the buyer or potential buyers. Okay, that was kept from us at all times, as one would understand. That's just naturally the way it goes. Mr. Burns had a number of conversations with people about those tapes, about buying those tapes, but it fell through because, in his opinion, because of the war in the Gulf, and therefore it had to be delayed. And I said to him, under no circumstances can there be yet another delay. It has to go in before the Unite the Cringedom Fest on the 16th of May, because this is the very last opportunity to do it. Because Dean Neal has been playing footsie with his shiny little pebble for over a year, hasn't he? Concealing it from the public domain. And so time is of the essence. Time is always of the essence, particularly when you're trying to bring down an organised criminal gang involved in a calculated, scheming, grifting tax avoidance operation, which is Team Tommy and Urban Scam. To you, to others, Urban Scoop. Okay? So that is why I said to him, this is the very last opportunity. You don't, my patience is at an end. I told them, all of them that, including Major Burns, Dean Neal. I told them, my patience is at an end. This does not go in on the 16th of May, and we're done. And it was perfectly clear that Major Burns couldn't make the deal go ahead before the 16th of May, so he was given the boot. Okay? That's the simple truth of the matter. At no time whatsoever was Richard Inman discussed in any of the discussions that we had together. I don't know if Mr. Neal discussed Richard Inman with Major Burns, because I wasn't there at those 3 meetings. By design, that is. And even though Major Burns wanted to patch us through on a 3-way WhatsApp call, I declined the offer. Because I know Mr. Neal has a bad habit of recording them and then concealing them from the public domain, you see. Won't be doing it with me. And as I said, Richard Inman was never a topic of the conversation. Prior to that, Paul Thorp was a topic of the conversation. And what I said to Major Burns was, on WhatsApp Business, on a call there, I said, well, why on earth is Paul Thorp relevant? You know, he's just only a bigger crumb. He's not one of the meals in the main course either. You know, using that analogy. He's just bigger crumbs than Richard Inman. You know, they're both crumbs on the table, quite frankly. And it was his opinion, which I oppose and also Dean Neal opposed, to use Paul Thorp as an example. Now, Major Burns said that he had access to software that could trace every financial transaction on the face of this earth just by putting the targeting data into it. And that targeting data was Paul Thorp. Not our idea. Major Burns' idea. Okay, we completely refused to go along with it. Not out of any favour to Mr. Thorp, but simply because I just don't realise, I don't understand how he's relevant. I understand what Major Burns was trying to achieve, but I didn't agree with it. But Paul Thorp just isn't relevant. He's not a major player. He thinks he is, because he's got a gargantuan ego. But in real terms, he isn't that relevant. He isn't that important. So this is how it went, and Major Burns explained that, using Thorp as an example to get him 2 to 3 years for financial malpractice, because he was absolutely convinced that Thorpe, quite apart from being accused of being a grifter, had actually been involved in some form of financial malpractice that they could put on him and get him 2 to 3 years. And then they could approach all the other YouTube support network, including all of the auditors, 2CTV, etc., and say to them, look, you either work for us now or you'll get what Thorpe's had. And I understand the logic behind it. You know, it's the leverage. This is how the intelligence services operate, you know, and they do these things. Absolutely right, they do. And obviously the plan was to send in people, former employees at Hereford and Poole, in other words, SAS and SBS, to deliver the message of you now work for us or else. Okay? It's not my operation, that side of it. I merely brokered the meetings between Dean Neal, and that was purely about the Peter Lynch tapes, not about any plan to take over Team Tommy and Urban Scam, rebrand it, make Dean Neal the leader, all of these ridiculous ideas. That's what I regarded them as being ridiculous, and I didn't want anything to do with them. So this Daily Bollocks video, quite frankly, not that far off the mark. It's just that it's not in relation to Richard Inman. It's more in relation to Paul Thorp, but specifically it's in relation to Tommy Robinson and the likes of 2CTV. You know, they were the targets that they really wanted to bring on board. bring under control. They want to just destroy Tommy completely, which is obviously a noble crusade, because he is just a grifting, low-life criminal piece of dung, in truth. 2C TV, nobody can work out how it ever became that popular. Other than the fact that it's being pumped and promoted by very powerful vested interests with lots of money, who managed to tweak it through the algorithm, because it's just lightweight infotainment. Drivel, quite frankly. Absolute bloody drivel. You see some more substance on the BBC, and that really does take some doing, doesn't it? And so that was the objective. And Richard Inman, little Dickie, little Dickie Inman, or little Dickie Man, and, or Ich das Übersoldat, just was never on the agenda. So where he's got all these ideas from, basically, because it's all about himself, isn't it? It's all about the greatness of his own personality, the significance of his own persona. He's just completely insignificant. He's irrelevant. He's just an arse-licker. Steve Burns was never interested in Richard Inman, and he was only ever interested in Paul Thorp as a means to bring all the other YouTubers on board. In other words, you work for us or face the same consequences Mr. Thorp endured, was planned to endure. We totally opposed it, both Dean Neal and myself, and I'm still opposed to it to this day, because I just don't see the significance of Paul Thorp, although I do understand his reasoning. What I actually said to him was, you should go after 2C TV, not Paul Thorp. You should go after 2C, yeah, and nobble him, and then all the others, believe me, will definitely fall into line. His strategic thinking, in my opinion, was just totally wrong on Paul Thorp. You need somebody much bigger than that, a big hitter, and then to bring them all on, like the Dan Wootons, etc., all the auditors, everyone. That was their plan, to get them all under control. And, who benefits? Well, obviously, you can work that one out for yourself, can't you? Who benefits from all of this? Well, the British secret state. You see, Major Burns used a great many smoke and mirrors, none of which fooled me in the slightest. I told Dean that from the outset, you should always regard that you are dealing with British intelligence here, masquerading behind a private military contact, because that's how they operate. And that was the plan, and that's all there is to it. And Richard Inman just, he's not far off the mark. The Daily Bollocks is not far off the mark, but not in relation to Richard Inman. Paul Thorp was much more of interest in this scenario, but frankly, it should have been the likes of 2C TV, and then he really would have got somewhere. Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Agenda, and hopefully we'll speak again tomorrow.